Okay, the first couple of questions have to do with ego. The first part of it is the ego or I thought rises. From where does it rise? The second part of this is the I thought, the primary, or the first thought, rises and identifies itself as this body. Where does this body come from? If the body and universe is a projection, how can it exist prior to the ego rising? So really that means it's like the ego rises and identifies with the body, but how is the body there before the ego rises?
Right. These are all good questions because this is the very core of Bhagavan's teachings. Bhagavan has identified the root cause of the disease we're all suffering from, the disease of self-ignorance, which is the cause of all problems. The root cause is our rising as ego. So his teachings are very much centered around the rising of ego and how to bring about the subsidence and eventual eradication of ego. Where does ego rise from? The simple answer is from ourself. From ourself here means from our real nature, from what we actually are. We can understand this by considering sleep. In sleep, there is no ego and there is nothing else. What exists in sleep is only ourself. And in sleep, we exist as pure awareness, which is our real nature. From sleep, we rise as ego. So it's only from ourself, from a pure awareness that we actually are, but we rise as ego. Because nothing exists prior to the nothing apart from pure awareness, nothing exists prior to the rising of ego. Ego can rise only from pure awareness. And what rises as ego, it's we who rise as ego. Ego is not some other thing. Your second question is also a very good one. Where does if ego rises and identifies itself as this body, where does this body come from? Does the body exist prior to the rising of ego? We can answer this simply by considering dream. As soon as we begin to dream ourselves as a dream body. I mean, we experience ourselves as a dream body. When we wake up from a dream, we understand that dream body was just our mental projection. We don't suppose that the dream body existed prior to our experiencing it as I. So the projection of the dream body and our experiencing it as I are simultaneous with our rising as ego. And as soon as we identify a body as I, through the five senses of that body, we project a world. This is what happens in dream. And Bhagavan says this waking state is just another dream. So long as we are waking, we assume we are not dreaming, we're awake. But even while dreaming, we generally assume we are awake. We don't think we are dreaming while we're dreaming. Sometimes we may think so, but as a general rule, we mistake ourselves to be awake while we are dreaming. Likewise, we now mistake ourselves to be awake, whereas in fact we are dreaming. That's a fairly brief answer to your question, but I think it's worth going into this question more deeply because, as I say, this is the very core of Bhagavan's teachings. And there are 3 verses in Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu in which Bhagavan deals with this subject in depth. The 3 verses are verses 24, 25, and 26. So I'll read each of these verses in turn. In verse 24, he begins by saying, Uļḷadu Nāṛpadu. That means the insentient body does not say I. Though he says here does not say I, obviously he's not saying this, he's not using say in a literal sense here. It's a metaphor for saying the insentient body is not aware of itself as I. And a little bit of clarification here. What he means by body is not just this physical body. In verse 5 of Uļḷadu Nāṛpadu, he begins by saying, Uru Panchakosa Uru. That means the body is a form composed of 5 sheaths. Those 5 sheaths are the physical form, the prana or life that animates that physical form, the mind, intellect, and will that function within it. All these we collectively experience as ourself. We never experience a body. We never experience ourselves as a dead body. Whenever we experience ourselves as a body, it's alive. So the life is there. And we also experience, in the absence of mind, we don't experience the body. So body, life, mind, intellect, and will, all these are experienced together. So the Bhagavan says there, all these five are included in the term body. The implication is that whenever he talks, often he says, ego is nothing but the false awareness, I am this body. What he means by body is not just the physical body, but the whole package of these five sheaths. But according to him, all these five sheaths are insentient. Even the mind is insentient. Here, when he talks about mind in this context, mind means the grosser functions of the mind, the thinking, perceiving, remembering, all these grosser functions of the mind are what are called manomaya kosha, the sheath formed of mind. Subtler than that is the vijnanamaya kosha, the intellect or buddhi. That is the judging and discriminating faculty of the mind. And subtler than that is the will. That's the totality of all our vasanas, all our inclinations that give rise to likes, dislikes, desires, hopes, fears, and attachments, and so on. So the subtlest of all the five sheaths is the will, which is generally called the Anandamaya kosha or the Karana Sarira. That consists of all the vasanas. And another term for that is chittam. Sometimes the mind is said to consist of four parts: manas, buddhi, chittam, and ahankaram. Manas is the grosser functions of the mind, as I said, the manomaya kosha. Buddhi is the intellect, chittam is the will, and ego is not any of the five sheaths, it's that which identifies all the five sheaths as itself. So sorry, that was a bit of a digression, but it was just to clarify what he means by the term body in this context. So he said, the jada body, jada means what is not aware, what is not sentient, does not say I. It's not aware of itself as I, in other words. Sat-chit does not rise. Sat-chit means being awareness. That is our fundamental awareness of our own existence. The mere awareness I am. Not awareness of anything else, but awareness only of being. What we experience as I am. So the sat-chit, the body does not say I, body is not aware of itself as I, and sat-chit does not rise. Then he says in the next sentence, in the third sentence, he says, in between, one thing, I, rises as the extent of the body. This requires some clarification. Literally, ideal means in between the body and sat-chit. That seems to imply that the body and the sat-chit exist there, and but in between the ego rises. But obviously he's using in between here in a metaphorical sense, because the body cannot exist independent of sat-chit. In fact, the body doesn't even exist independent of ego. So when he says in between, this is he's using the term metaphorically. To illustrate the sense in which he uses the term in between, I think the clearest way of illustrating it is if you read some story in a newspaper or online somewhere, and you ask someone, is it true? They may say it's neither true nor false, it's somewhere in between. That means it's got certain elements of truth, it's got certain elements of falsehood. It's neither entirely true nor entirely false. So it's in that sense that he uses the term in between here. That is the one thing that rises as I is neither the body nor is it sat-chit, but it partakes of the qualities of both. So in between, one thing I rises as the extent of the body. What he means by as the extent of the body is when we rise as ego, we feel ourselves to be limited within the confines of the body. That is, we are within the body, not outside the body. So the body is, as it were, the limits of our existence. So it appears to us when we rise as ego. So when we rise as ego, this one thing, what he refers to here as Nāṉ Ār, one thing I, that means, implies one thing called I. We are neither the Satchit, the being awareness, nor are we the body. But we are aware, this I is aware of itself as if it were the body. And then in the final sentence of this verse, he says, know that this is Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, bondage, jiva, jiva means soul, nupame means subtle body, ahande means ego, this samsara, mind. So this I that rises, it's referred to as all these things. But obviously, what he's taught, the I that rises is ego. It's also mind. It's mind in the sense it's the essence of the mind. It's what the mind essentially is, because ego is the root thought of the mind. It's also samsara, because samsara means the endless cycle of activity, birth after birth, life after life, the cycle of birth and death, you can say. It also means all activity within each life. So it's essentially it's ego that is the seed that gives rise to samsara, is the implication there. He also calls it subtle body. This is an unusual usage of the term subtle body, because generally in Advaita philosophy, they use the term subtle body in a different sense. But according to Bhagavan, all the five sheaths are, relatively speaking, gross. What is subtle is ego. So he refers to it as the subtle body. It's that which animates all these five sheaths. He also refers to it as jivan. Sorry, I'm working backwards because I'm coming to the most important one, which is Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu at the end. Jiva means, we can translate it as life or as soul. It's more or less equivalent to the term soul as used in Western philosophy or religion. It's bandham. Bandham means bondage. That is, there is no bondage except our rising as ego, is what he implies. But the most significant term he uses here is Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. Uļļadu Nāṛpadu literally means awareness, awareness, non-awareness, not. That is, chit means awareness, jada means what is not aware, and granti means a not. The reason ego is called Uļļadu Nāṛpadu is if, for example, you have two pieces of string, a red string and a blue string. If you entangle them so they get it into a deeply entangled knot, the knot is neither the red string nor is it the green string. It is what results by the entanglement of the two. Likewise, ego is neither the insentient body, jada udal, but insentient body, nor is it the satchit, the real awareness. It's what seems to exist when these two things become entangled. So that is why when Bhagavan often said the ego is nothing but the false awareness, I am this body, the I am in I am this body is the chit element. The body is the jada element, the insentient, the non-aware element. And ego is the knot formed by these two. Here, if we don't understand the context of this, if we don't understand the background of Bhagavan's teachings, it would be easy to say here, but to assume that this implies that the body exists independently of satchit, and that between these two an ego rises. But we have to understand Bhagavan is, many of these verses of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, they're like sutras, that's like aphorism. Bhagavan says things in a very, he packs a lot into a very few words. So we have to understand the implication of these words, and we have to understand them in the context of his broader teaching. So, as I say, the body doesn't exist, though it may seem to imply here that the insentient body exists independent of satchit. That is not what he means to imply. he also doesn't mean to imply that the body exists prior to the rising of ego. That will be clarified particularly in the verse 26. But let's first deal with 25. 25 is possibly the most important. I mean, this contains the very essence of Bhagavan's teachings. What he says in verse 25, he begins by saying, the subject of this verse, he says in the last line. So he just begins by saying what the verse means literally is, Uļḷadu Nāṛpadu, grasping form, it comes into existence. Grasping form, it stands. Grasping and feeding on form, it grows abundantly. Leaving form, it grasps form. If sought, it takes flight. This, and then in the last line he says, Uļḷadu Nāṛpadu. That is the subject. That is what it refers to. Is Uļḷadu Nāṛpadu means the formless phantom ego. So the formless phantom ego, grasping form, it comes into existence. Grasping form, it stands. Grasping and feeding on form, it grows abundantly. When it leaves one form, it grasps another form. But if it seeks itself, if it tries to investigate itself, it disappears, it takes flight. We could take this to mean that grasping form, it comes into existence. We could take it to mean by grasping form, it comes into existence. But that, though in a sense it means that, we shouldn't take that too literally. It is not, the word by actually is not there. But if you say grasping form, it comes into existence, that seems to imply by grasping form. How ego comes into existence, Bhagavan said, is something that cannot be explained. Because if we investigate ego, we will find it never came into existence. So trying to explain how ego came into existence, Bhagavan often used to say, is like trying to explain how the son of a barren woman was born. If the woman is barren, she has no son. If she has a son, she's not a barren woman. So there's no such thing as the son of a barren woman. So there's no explanation for how the son of a barren woman came to be born, because there's no such thing to be born. Likewise, there is actually no such thing as ego. If we investigate it, we'll find it doesn't actually exist. So but so long as we, it seems to exist. So long as we are attending to anything other than ourselves, we seem to be ego. So when Bhagavan says grasping form, it comes into existence, he means as soon as it comes into existence, or simultaneously with coming into existence, it grasps a form. So does that mean a form exists independent of it? That will be clarified in the next verse, but it doesn't. But grasping, how do we grasp a dream body as I? The dream body doesn't exist there independent. As soon as we rise as ego, we project and experience ourselves as a body. So grasping form, and he says the ego is a formless phantom. So as a formless phantom, how can it grasp anything? It doesn't have any hands or to grasp anything. So what does he mean by grasping form? Ego is just an awareness, not a real awareness, it's a false awareness. When it grasps something, it means grasping it in its awareness. Though ego grasps many things in its awareness, it grasps the body in its awareness in a very special way. It grasps the body and mistakes it to be itself. So when he talks about, in the first sentence, when he talks about grasping form, it comes into existence, that means, what he means by grasping, what is implied there, is that it projects the form of a body and grasps it as I. It's aware of it as I. So that the body doesn't exist independent of the rising of ego. As soon as ego rises, it projects the body and experiences it as I. And then through the five senses of that body, it projects so many other forms, what appears to be an external world. So comes into existence grasping form. Grasping form, it stands. That means so long as ego endures, it's always grasping form. First form it grasps is the body as I. The body means all the 5 sheaths, the physical form, life, mind, intellect, and will. All these it grasps as I. And so by grasping these as I, it stands. And while grasping these, it also grasps so many other forms. We're aware of so many other things. And then he says, grasping and feeding on form, it grows abundantly. Why he says feeding on form, what nourishes and sustains ego is its awareness of things other than itself. The more we direct our attention outwards, away from ourselves, towards other things, the more we are thereby feeding and nourishing the ego. And thus it grows abundantly, it flourishes. When ego leaves one form, it grasps another form. Obviously, in sleep, it subsides, but then when it rises again, it grasps another form. So leaving one form, it grasps another form. Ego never stands without grasping a form. But then the most important sentence here is, Hedinal otum piticum. If sought, it takes flight. That means the nature of ego is to grasp form. It's always it's always being aware. Form here means any phenomena. Being aware of anything, any phenomena, anything other than itself is what he means by grasping form. But the ego itself, it has no form of its own. Though it cannot stand without identifying itself as a body, it has no form of its own. That's why it has to grasp a form in order to stand, in order to exist, or even in order to rise. It has to grasp a form. When he says Tedina, that literally means if it seeks. But in this context, it implies if it seeks itself or if it is sought. Or I think it's best stated as if it seeks itself, it will take flight. That is, if we as ego turn our attention back towards ourselves to see who am I, this ego will dissolve and disappear. Why is that? Because we seem to be ego only when we're looking at other things. When we look back at ourselves, there's no such thing as ego to be found. As he says in verse 17 of Upadēśa Undiyār, Manatin uruve maravadu chava manameno mondrile undipara. That means when one investigates the form of the mind, that means ego, without forgetfulness, without forgetting, there is no such thing as ego, as mind at all. This is the direct path for everyone. So the nature of ego, it seems to exist only when we're looking away from ourselves at other things. When we look back at ourselves, ego dissolves and disappears. This is the key to understanding Bhagavan's teachings. So long as we are attending to anything other than ourselves, we are thereby nourishing and sustaining our existence as ego. If we try to turn our attention away from other things, back towards ourselves, to the extent that we focus our attention on ourselves and thereby withdraw it from other things, to that extent ego dissolves and subsides back into its source. So if we could attend to ourselves keenly enough, but our attention was thereby withdrawn from all forms, that is, from all phenomena, we would experience ourselves just as pure awareness, which is what we actually are. And thereby ego would be dissolved, destroyed forever. So in this verse, Bhagavan, as far as I'm aware, in no other text or no ancient teaching of Advaita, though Bhagavan's teachings are Advaita, he has presented Advaita in a very fresh and original manner. And in this verse where he reveals the nature of ego, I don't think this has ever been so clearly explained in any other text or by anyone else before Bhagavan. It may have been indirectly implied, but here Bhagavan states it very explicitly. The nature of ego is to grasp form. If instead of grasping, form means anything other than itself, in other words, to attend to things other than itself, if it tries to attend to itself, if it tries to grasp itself, thereby dissolve. This is the key to understanding the efficacy of self-investigation, and why he said self-investigation is the only means by which we can annihilate ego. I've gone over these two verses to say, to explain what Bhagavan says about the nature of ego. It is neither the body nor is it Sat-Chit. It's some spurious entity that rises between these two, taking on the qualities of both. Both it's as ego, we are aware, which is the quality of Sat-Chit. We also find ourselves limited within time and space, which is the quality of body. So we take on both the quality of the body and the qualities of Sat-Chit, and we take both of as our own. Another thing in this verse, he describes ego as Uļḷadu. Uļḷadu means formless phantom ego. Formless means it has no form of its own. That's why it cannot exist without grasping a form as itself. He also calls it a pay. Pay means a phantom or a ghost. Something. What is a ghost? A ghost is something without any substance. It's not real. It's just an appearance. So the ego has no substance of its own. But just like it has no form of its own, but borrows usurps the form of a body as itself, it has no substance of its own, but usurps the real substance, which is awareness, as its own. So the substance is awareness, which is the nature of Sat-Chit. The form is the body, which is something which isn't aware. So it's these two things entangled together to form this Chit-Jada Granti, this not formed by the entanglement of what is aware, namely Sat-Chit, and what is non-aware, namely the body. So this is the nature of ego. And then because these two verses, when he says grasping form, it could seem to suggest that there was a form existing, and by grasping that form, it comes into existence. The fact that nothing precedes the existence of ego is made clear by him in verse 26. What he says in verse 26 is, Ahande undayin anatum undahum. If ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. Ahande indrail indru anatum. If ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. Ahande yabamam. Ego itself is everything. That is when as soon as we rise as ego, we project all this everything, all phenomena, coming to existence only when we rise as ego. When we don't rise as ego, as in sleep, there are no phenomena. There's nothing except pure awareness. So ego itself is what has expanded as all this phenomena. So ego is the seed from which this whole world has, all phenomena have sprouted. It's in that sense that he says ego itself is everything. Then in the next sentence, also a very important sentence, he says, therefore, investigating what this is giving up everything. Know that investigating what this is giving up everything. This here refers to ego, obviously. So investigating what this ego is giving up everything. Why is that? Because if we investigate ego, as he said in the previous sentence, if we investigate it, it takes flight. It disappears. It dissolves and disappears. So, and when ego disappears, everything else disappears along with it. So investigating what the ego is giving up everything. This is why, so long as we are reluctant to give up all our desires and attachments, so long as we're reluctant to let go of everything else, investigating ourselves seems to be difficult. It is not actually difficult. What can be easier than knowing ourselves? It seems to be difficult because we are unwilling to let go of other things. We must be willing to renounce everything in order to know what we actually are. Because what we actually are is the pure awareness, and pure awareness means awareness that is aware of nothing other than itself. And what actually exists is only that pure awareness. Everything else is a mere appearance. So the answer to your question, Marty, is no, the body doesn't exist prior to the rising of ego. Where did this body come from? Like everything else, it comes only from ego. First we rise as ego, next we project, As we rise as ego, it's not even a step-by-step, simultaneous with our rising of ego. The very nature of our rising as ego involves the projection and identification of ourself with the body. So this body has no existence independent of ego, but also ego cannot come into existence without projecting and experiencing itself as a body. It's not always the same body. Though Bhagavan often says, ego is I am this body, he's not referring just to this. Whatever is the current body that we experience as I, when we're dreaming, this body refers to a dream body. Now we're awake, this body refers to our present body. So it's whatever body we always identify somebody as or other as ourself. So as you say, if ego and universe is a projection, meaning a projection of ego, how can it exist prior to the ego rising? The simple answer is no, it cannot. Ego rises and simultaneously projects all these things. And where does it project all these things? Though the universe seems to be, the world seems to be existing outside of us, it's existing outside the limits of the body. But actually the whole thing is existing where? It's existing in our own mind. When we dream, we seem to see a world outside, but that seemingly external world is actually seen by us only within our own mind. So when we project the body and world, we project it within the space of our own mind. And where did the space of, so the whole, it's sometimes said in Advaita philosophy, the Buddhakasha, the physical space, is contained within the Manakasha, the mind space. And the mind space is contained within Chittakasa, the space of awareness, of pure awareness, that is. So ego, where does ego rise from? It rises from ourself. But not only does it rise from ourself, it rises within ourself. There's no such thing as outside ourself, because we are the infinite whole. I mean, there's no limit on pure awareness. The limit's only on forms. Since pure awareness is formless, it has no limit. So there's no outside of pure awareness. So we arise from within, from pure awareness, but within pure awareness. We never go out of pure awareness. So Marty, does that adequately answer your question? Or do you or anyone else have any questions about this?
Does anyone else? It answers my questions for sure. Does anyone else have questions about this?
At the very end, Michael, you said we project the self and world only within the space of our own mind.
Yes.
There is no such thing as outside ourself.
Yes.
I believe that too. At least I've been coming along to believe it. It's a lot to swallow for a raised Catholic and practicing Christianity for decades.
Yes.
But I do believe it. However, if that's true, why do all of us seem to dance around the issues and layers and complexities of duality instead of going right to the core of the matter?
The answer to that is, the answer to all problems, why, is because we've risen as ego. Why have we risen as ego? That cannot be explained. Because the ego is the first cause. Cause and effect comes into existence only with our rising as ego. So because there's nothing prior to ego, that ego is the causeless cause. It's the cause of everything else, but because nothing exists prior to it, there's no cause for ego. We cannot say pure awareness is the cause of ego, because in the view of ourselves as pure awareness, there never was any ego, there never is any ego. So that is why ego is called Maya. Bhagavan gave a very novel interpretation of the term Maya. Like generally people know Maya means illusion or what is not real, or some people have a vague idea. Bhagavan, this may not be the actual etymology, but Bhagavan gave a very significant etymology for it. Whether it's how the word originates or not doesn't matter. The etymology Bhagavan gave is very significant in that it explains what Maya actually is. That is, Ya is a female form of what, and Ma means not. So Bhagavan said Maya means what is not. Maya is a power. and power is generally personified in Hindu mythology as female. So that's why Maya is feminine gender. That is, there's Shiva and Shakti. There's God and God's power. Actually, they are one, but they seem, from a dualistic perspective, God and his power seem to be two things, though actually they are one. So that God and his power is personified as Shiva and Shakti. Shakti means power. So Maya is what is not, or she who is not. So the very word, Bhagavan said, the very word Maya denotes its own non-existence. So what is Maya? Bhagavan said, Maya is nothing but your own, but ego or mind itself. So there is no, we cannot, Maya is said to be Atma-vichara. It literally means inexpressible. But it can also be taken to mean inexplicable. We cannot explain Maya. Because, why we cannot explain Maya? Because it doesn't actually exist. How can we explain something that doesn't actually exist? It really seems to exist. And in whose view does Maya exist? Only in the view of ourselves as ego. If we investigate ourselves to see what we actually are, we will see we were never ego, and therefore there never was any Maya. This is, as you say, this is a very, very radical teaching. Maybe it's difficult for us to get our head around at first, but if we're willing to accept this, it makes it, well, if we're willing to accept this, the rest of Bhagavan's teachings all fall in place. But the root cause of everything is ego. There is no cause prior to ego. Ego is the cause of everything. Ego is the first cause.
A real quick follow-up, if I might. Ego is clearly, the way you just described it, yes, the most powerful force. I mean, more than anything. Yes.
But Bhagavan describes it as Adisaya Shakti. It's an extraordinary power, a wonderful power.
Increasingly, we're becoming aware of more people who appear to be self-awakened. Are they immune to ego at that stage?
No, to tell you the truth, there's no such thing as a self-awakened person. To say self-awakened and person, it's a contradiction in terms. So long as we take ourselves, so long as we experience ourselves as a person, we are not self-awakened. When we are self-awakened, there is only self. There's nothing else. There's only pure awareness. So, but from our point of view, because we take ourselves to be a person, we see someone like Bhagavan, and we say, we see Bhagavan as a person. But according to Bhagavan, he's not the person, he's not the body that he seems to be. He's not the mind that he seems to be. In his experience, I alone am. I am just pure awareness. In the 7th paragraph of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, Bhagavan says, Yatātamai Uļļadu Atma Sarupam Andre. That means what actually exists is only the real nature of oneself. So we alone exist. There is no other. But because we are now mistaking ourselves to be a body, so we see Bhagavan as a body. We see Bhagavan as a person, just like us. But in Bhagavan's view, he doesn't see either his body or our body. He sees only pure awareness. That's why he says in verse 31 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, they meaning the one who is established in that state of pure awareness, does not see anything other than itself. How can we understand the state of such a one? How to understand it? We have to be it. We cannot understand it by mind.
Thank you.
Okay, and next.
Can I just ask one question?
Sure, go ahead.
Michael, when you're talking about having the dream, I'm not putting words in your mouth. I'm asking you if I'm doing this correctly. But the way you're describing it sounds like you're saying the mind body is projecting a dream. But if you're aware that the mind body is just pure awareness, then it's pure awareness that's projecting the dream. Is that correct?
Pure awareness doesn't project anything, because in the view of pure awareness means awareness that is aware of nothing other than itself. That is what we actually are.
So pure awareness could not dream?
No, pure awareness cannot dream. But what is it that is dreaming? It is ego. So we could say, as ego, pure awareness is dreaming. But as pure awareness never dreams. Because what is ego but pure awareness? So what is causing, if you see a rope and mistake it to be a snake, what causes the fear is the snake. The snake is actually nothing but a rope. But the rope as a rope doesn't cause fear. It's only the rope as a snake that causes fear. So if you see the rope as it is, your fear will vanish. But so long as you see the rope as a snake, you feel fear. Likewise, so long as we see ourselves, who are pure awareness, as ego, we have all these troubles. When we see ourselves as we actually are, then we are free of all troubles. Fear, desire, everything goes.
So when there's only pure awareness, there's only deep sleep. Is that correct?
Yes, in a sense, yes. But sleep is nothing but a state of pure awareness. But pure awareness is our real nature. When we are aware of ourselves as a body, we are not aware of ourselves as we actually are. So though in sleep we were aware of ourselves as we actually are, we cannot now recollect that. That is, we are aware that we existed in sleep, but we are not aware of, we are aware that we were in sleep. We are not aware of what we were in sleep. Just like now, we are aware that I am, but we are not aware what I am. We are aware of ourselves as something other than what we actually are. So because we are now not aware of ourselves as we actually are, we cannot be aware of what we were aware of in sleep. What we were aware of in sleep is what we actually are. So though sleep is a state of pure awareness, our recollection of that pure awareness is clouded when we rise, by our rising as ego, as a result of our rising as ego. So that is why generally people take sleep to be, we're all aware, we weren't aware of anything in sleep, but it seems to us to be a dull state, a state of, okay, we were happy in sleep, that's all. But in fact, sleep is a state of infinite happiness.
Right.
But it's clouded by our rising as ego.
And did you not say a few minutes ago that no one knows how the ego arises? Did you say that?
Yes, yes. Bhagavan said that's one thing that can never be explained. But ego, okay. Ego is the first cause.
Go ahead.
No cause. So
I'm sorry?
If you try to find what the ego is, if you try to find it, what it is, you find there's no such thing. When there's no such thing, how can you explain how a non-existent thing came into existence? It never came into existence.
So that's the conundrum, because no one knows, correct me again if this is wrong, but no one knows why the ego arises from sleep.
Yes.
Or how it arises from sleep.
No.
So it's a process that's going to be never ending.
Yes. But
even when pure awareness is known, at some point the ego is going to rise again.
No. Because that is what Bhagavan has told us in these 3 verses that I explain now. What Bhagavan has told us is not actually how ego comes into existence, but he has explained to us the nature of ego. Understand the nature of ego. We seem to be ego so long as we are attending to anything other than ourselves. If we attend to ourselves, ego is thereby dissolved. When we are aware of ourselves as pure awareness, as what we actually are, we will know, but we have never risen as ego. If we had risen as ego in the past, then we could arise as ego again. But the state of jnana is a state in which we are clearly aware, but we have never risen as ego. So once we know what we actually are, there can never be any return. Ego can never rise again, because ego had, once we reach that state, we will know that we were always as we actually are, and ego had never arisen.
Well, can it not be that we're just calling the ego, that what we're calling the ego is just pure awareness?
It is, but though the snake is just a rope, it looks to us like a snake, and therefore it's making us afraid.
Right.
As long as we see it as a snake, we feel fear. When we see it as a rope, then the fear vanishes. Likewise with ego.
And that's my point. If we see the world or whatever we see, if we see that as ego, then that's the separation. If we see it as self and know it as self on a visceral,
yes, but how can we see the world as ourself when we don't see ourselves as ours?
Because the world doesn't even exist. We're just calling it that.
So first we have to see ourselves as pure awareness. Then we will see that pure awareness alone exists.
Right.
What was formerly seen as a world, what was formerly seen as a snake is actually a rope. What was formerly seen as a world is actually pure awareness.
Okay. I think we're saying the same thing, but just got to keep on keeping on.
Yeah. But all this teaching, it's all very nice, what Bhagavan has taught us, but he's taught us for a particular purpose. Or whatever he has taught us, he has taught it for a practical purpose. So he's revealed to us the nature of ego so that we can get rid of it. So
exactly.
The core of all Bhagavan's teachings is the practice. We have to put it into practice.
He wants to call the rope all the time. And not be a snake.
Yes, but merely saying it's a rope, so long as you see it as a snake, you tell yourself this is a rope, this is a rope. The fear is still there because it still looks. Nowadays, there are many neo-Advaitins who very glibly talk, oh, there's no ego, there's nothing to worry about.
Right.
Sure, there's no ego, but so long as there seems to be ego, we have all the problems resulting from ego. Now we have so many, we seem to be a small person in a big world with so many problems, and there's this coronavirus, there's all sorts of political problems, there's poverty, there's injustice, there's so many things. And even if the world was in a better condition than it is now, we know one day that we're going to die. So but our existence as ego is an imperfect state. So merely saying, oh, there's no ego doesn't solve the problem. We need to turn our attention within to actually experience the non-existence of ego. We can experience the non-existence of ego only by seeing ourselves as we actually are. But in order to see ourselves as we actually are, we have to give up everything else. As Bhagavan said, investigate what it is, giving up everything. So until we are willing to give up everything, it will seem to be difficult. Exactly. So we are bound. That's why Bhagavan says ego is bondage. We are bound by it so long as we are. But this is a very peculiar sort of prison. Bhagavan used to say, everyone says it's like a person who's holding on to a tree and saying, oh, this tree won't let go of me. It's not the tree, but it's holding you. You are holding the tree. If you want to be free, you have to let go. So we have to be willing to let go of all this. Bondage is not something outside. It's we who bound ourselves by attaching ourselves to this world.
Thank you so much.
Is there room for another question?
Yes, certainly.
Okay. So what I have watched in my life with my little nephew on his first birthday, where there was a total innocence involved with his playing his body, and then suddenly everybody sang a happy birthday song to him, and I could almost see in his eyes the switch, oh, they're doing this for me. So like the ego was born at age 1.
Yeah.
It seemed like, so the body though existed before, that's part 1 of the question, but he didn't have a me awareness of his own body. And it seemed like a switch was turned, boom, and there was the me.
Yeah, Once someone asked Bhagavan, why do we find small children so attractive? Bhagavan said, because they haven't yet sprouted their horns.
Right.
It's all there. That is, ego is there from a time, that is, so long as we are aware of anything other than ourselves, what is aware of that is ego. But ego is not outwardly manifest. From the perspective of an onlooker, we don't see the ego so obviously manifest in a small child. But as the child grows, the ego, the presence of ego and all its vasanas becomes more and more evident. If you see children in a kindergarten, you see so many different personalities. Where do they get those different personalities from? It's the baggage they brought from their previous lives. We are all born that the ego is always accompanied by vasanas. Vasanas means inclinations. And those inclinations are what make up our personality, our character, our behavior, and everything.
So then you're saying the ego also exists in a person like less than a 1-year-old because he perceives things outside of himself, and that constitutes ego?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Not only things outside, so long as we're aware of anything other than ourselves, anything other than pure awareness. So even our awareness of the body is an awareness of is ego. It's ego.
I see.
Aware of itself in the body.
Okay. So we come in with this all the way.
We come in, yes. It's just the vasanas are not so obvious at the time of birth. As the child develops, it becomes more and more obvious.
And the stronger the vasanas are, the harder it is to disconnect from all that.
Exactly. That is why the key to any form of spiritual practice is what is called purification of mind. What are the impurities in the mind? Nothing but the vasanas. Right. Vasanas are what draw our mind outwards. And if our vasanas are strong, then we become selfish and uncaring and everything. To the extent that our vasanas are reduced in strength, we become kinder, more caring, more compassionate, more humble. All the good qualities come to the extent that the vasanas are weakened. All the bad qualities come to the extent that the vasanas are very strong.
So then one more thing. So the practices of self-inquiry and meditation is to lessen the strength of it, right? But the ultimate step over into self-awareness then must be some kind of total surrender of something, because even practice can't take us there.
Yes. That is, there are many different types of spiritual practice. The aim of all spiritual practices is in one way or another to purify the mind. But different practices have different efficacy. Bhagavan has in Upadēśa Undiyār, he's very briefly summarized this. Different practices by the body, that he calls puja, that means worship. They are the least effective at purifying the mind. Practices by japa, or anything by speech, that is more effective because speech is, relatively speaking, subtler than body. And more effective than that is meditation, because that's by mind. But even in meditation, the more effective than, he's talking there, this in terms of the bhakti marga. So he's talking, more than meditating on God as something other than ourselves, meditating on him as not other than oneself. That means meditating on him as I, that is the best of all. That means that is the most effective means to purify the mind. Because if you have devotion to God, and you're always thinking of God, meditating on God or whatever, you're weakening, you'll still have inclinations to, you still have inclinations to think about the world, you still have cares about your body and about your family and about your bank balance and whether you can pay your mortgage and things. But the more you think of God, the more you're taking your mind away from these worldly concerns and leaving the burden on God. So in that way, you're weakening the vasanas. but still you're allowing your mind to go out to something else. You still take God to be something other than yourself. But God is not other than ourselves. God is what is shining in us as I. When we turn our attention within to attend to I, so what he calls as meditation on not another, that means self-attentiveness, self-investigation. When we turn our attention within, the vasanas are what are the inclinations that are constantly trying to pull our mind outwards. So the more we turn our attention within, the more we are thereby weakening the outward going vasanas, and we are strengthening what is called the satvasana. Satvasana means the inclination just to be as we actually are, which is just as pure awareness. So, so the most effective way to weaken the vasanas is the practice of self-investigation. Other means will purify the mind to a certain extent, but less, they'll do so less. It's a more roundabout way of purifying the mind, and it cannot lead to complete purification of mind, because what is the root of all the impurities? The vasanas are the impurities, but whose vasanas are they? They're my vasanas. In other words, they're ego's vasanas. So the root of all vasanas is ego. And in order to eradicate ego, self-investigation is the only means. Why? Because what is ego? It's nothing but a false awareness of ourself. That is an awareness of ourself as something other than what we actually are. So if we, in order to get rid of ego, the only way to get rid of the wrong awareness of ourselves is correct awareness of ourselves. So we can get rid of ego only by being aware of ourselves as we actually are. Because ego is awareness of ourselves as something other than what we actually are, we can get rid of it only by being aware of ourselves as we actually are. So self-investigation is not only the most effective means to weaken the vasanas, it's also the only means by which we can get rid of the root, ego. So that is why Bhagavan said, this is the direct path. This is the only path that can actually get us to our goal. All the other spiritual paths are like tributaries. None of those tributaries will reach the ocean directly. They all have to flow into this, the main river, which is the river of self-investigation. That alone can lead us directly to the ocean.
Right.
So, excuse me, Rosemary's next question kind of like fits. Pardon me?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask some more, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I think it's okay, because even if we can't get through all the questions this time, we can do so some other time, because this is really the crux of Bhagavan's teachings.
Yeah, so I just want to make a clarification. Through self-attentiveness, through Atma-vichara, when we come to see that the ego is false and really experience it, for a lack of a better term, then everything disappears. The world disappears, and you never return.
Yes.
So conversely, if we see the world, if we wake up in the morning, that means we have not attained that awakening.
Exactly.
It's that radical.
It's that radical.
And when we die, and if we have multiple lives, even then, between lives, it's still just an egoic projection.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, so even then, right. And so through multiple lives, if we are so blessed to practice this, at some point when we do finally see that the ego never existed, then there is never a universe or the world or wonderful children or anything.
Exactly. Okay. The death of the body is not real death.
Right.
It's a phony death. Because
it's just dropping of the body, but the other layers still continue,
what needs to die is the ego.
Right.
And ego will die how to kill the snake. There's no, if there was actually a snake, if we took a stick and beat it, it would die. But since it's not a snake, it's only a rope. However much you beat it, it's not going to die.
Gonna come back to this thing.
The only way to kill ego, but when you say all these other spiritual practices, it's like taking a stick to kill the snake. In this self-investigation, how do we kill the snake? We look at it very carefully, and when we look at it carefully enough, we see it's a rope. Thereby, we have effectively killed the snake.
Right.
When you say seeing the non-existence of ego, we can say that in a way. We see the non-existence of ego, but how do we see the non-existence of ego? By seeing that what actually exists is only pure awareness. How do we see the non-existence of the snake? Only by seeing that it is a rope.
Yeah. And that's with the attention turned completely inward.
Yes, yes.
The only way.
Yes, yes.
And with the attention turned completely inward, then everything vanishes.
Everything vanishes. Along with its root, which is ego.
Right.
And because that vanishes, there's no return.
Right. Now, the story of Ramana was he first had his first and only, I guess, awakening at 16, but then there was a second death later on in his life, but that was just another projection of those around him, and then what
His story was over on that day in Madurai when he had that fear of death. That was the end. Everything else is just in our view.
Right, okay.
Regarding that so-called second death experience, it was recorded in the early biographies, this so-called second death experience. And Bhagavan kept quiet for many years. There were many things that incorrect information were written in biographies, and Bhagavan didn't much bother about them. But a few things later on in his life, he corrected. He once said, that was not the second death experience, that was the last death experience. Between the first one in Madurai and that last one in 1912 on the Tortoise Rock, it happened to him several times that the body just became lifeless. And after some 15, 20 minutes or so, the life suddenly came back. The reason that last one was called the second death experience, that was the only one that was actually witnessed by any other person. Because he was accompanied by Parani Swami that day. Parani Swami saw it and told others about it. But Bhagavan became lifeless for 20 minutes.
Right. But to clarify, he didn't correct anything because he wasn't even there, right? I mean, that's just another story.
Yes, there's a nice story.
It's a nice story, but he never corrected anybody.
No, he didn't. He's least concerned because for him, this is all just a...
he wasn't even there. He wasn't even there, right?
Yeah. Okay. He wasn't there, but he is what is always there.
That's right, that's right.
When everyone was weeping that he's going away, he said, where can I go?
Right.
I am always here. Because he is that which is shining in each one of us as I.
Yeah.
And that I is the one thing that is ever present.
Say anything because it's just a dream, right? So
Yeah,
it's not
yeah.
Okay.
Okay, shall we go on to the next question?
And yes, this comes from Rosemary. Rosemary, do you want to ask Michael your question about self-inquiry?
You're muted. You're muted.
Okay. Actually, Marty posed that question for me because I no longer was interested in doing that because it didn't seem like anybody else was interested. If anybody's interested, I think it would be fun to go through the self-inquiry process. And then if that creates more interest, do a workshop. But if nobody wants to do the practice or has any interest in it, that question could be skipped, you know.
Well, the practice is the most important thing. That is what the teaching is all about. But the practice, it's a practice of investigation. It is not actually the only way to learn to practice self-investigation is to practice self-investigation. Just like the only way to learn to ride a bicycle is to try to ride a bicycle. You get on the bicycle, you wobble, you fall off. After many attempts, you slowly begin to find out how you begin to find your balance. And eventually, it becomes second nature to you. Riding, there's nothing easier than, once you know how to ride a bicycle, it's so easy. Before you knew how to ride a bicycle, it was very difficult. How on earth do you balance on this thing with two wheels? You wobble and fall off. So it's the same with self-investigation. Bhagavan has given us many clues. That is, he said to us, turn your attention within. And he even gave, for those who found it difficult, he suggested various things. He said, if you have difficulty fixing your attention on yourself, you can simply go on repeating the word I, but not just repeating it mechanically, repeating it and trying to be aware of what this word I is referring to. In other words, your own awareness. He also gave, presented in the form of questions. Not that he wanted us to question mechanically, but whenever our attention is turned away towards anything else, who is aware of this? I am. We turn our attention back towards ourselves. So what the practice of self-investigation is simply attending to ourselves. To understand what that means, we first have to understand what we are not. That is, so long as we take ourselves with this body or this mind or these thoughts or anything, if we attend to these things, we are not attending to ourselves. All these things are other than ourselves. Everything perceived by us, every phenomenon, every object, every form is something other than ourselves. We are not an object, we are the subject. We are not a thing perceived, we are the perceiver. But as the perceiver, we're always aware of ourselves. So we are not attending to any object. We are attending to that which is aware of all objects. Obviously, the subject is far more subtle than the objects, because the objects are all forms. The subject is something formless. That subject is ego. So at first, it seems something rather, it may seem rather intangible. How do we attend to ourselves? But that's like at the stage where you're trying to balance on the bicycle and it's wobbling so much. At first it seems difficult, but if you go on trying to attend to yourself, slowly it becomes more and more clear what is meant by self-attentiveness. That is, we are always aware of ourselves. There is never a moment when we are not aware of ourselves. We are always aware I am. But most of the time, we are more interested in attending to other things than we are in attending to ourselves. So though we are always self-aware, we are negligently self-aware. We're always aware I am, but we're not always attentively aware that I am, because we are more interested in attending to other things. So we have to replace our negligent self-awareness with attentive self-awareness. In other words, we have to be attentively self-aware. The self-awareness remains the same, but whereas normally we are negligently self-aware because we're more interested in attending to other things, we've got to become attentively self-aware. There's not much more that can be said in words. The rest we have to try to put it into practice. But I would say one thing: the more clearly we understand Bhagavan's teachings, the clearer the practice becomes. Because all the teachings are like spokes. The hub of Bhagavan's teachings is self-investigation. And all the teachings are spokes leading us back to that hub. So at the beginning we went through those 3 verses of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. The whole point of those 3 verses, that Bhagavan is talking about ego. He's drawing our attention back to this I. He's explains to us we are not this body, nor are we the pure Satchit. We are some spurious thing that has arisen between. But if we attend to this spurious thing, it merges back into its source, which is Satchit. So the way to experience ourselves as Satchit means the pure awareness that we actually are, being awareness, is to attend to ourselves. Though it seems that we're attending to ego, that doesn't matter, because if we look at ego carefully enough, we will see it's just pure awareness. Just as if we look at the snake carefully enough, we'll see it's just a rope. So it is useful to talk about this practice, but it's not like there's more information that can be given about the practice. To discover what is self-investigation, we need to investigate ourselves. That is, when you start off an investigation, you don't know where the investigation is going to lead you. As you go along the investigation, the way becomes more and more clear. We are used to investigating things outside. Supposing you want to learn a language, you've got to investigate how this language, what are the verbs, what are the nouns, how the sentences are constructed. As you go along, the way to learn that language becomes clearer and clearer. Likewise, in this path of self-investigation, the more we travel along this path, the clearer the way becomes. So in this connection, Sadhu Om used to tell a very nice story. That is, Sadhu Om often used to say, just try a little, and if you begin to try, you'll get hooked on it, and you'll try it more and more and more. And to illustrate this, he told a nice story. There was a poor Arab trader who had a camel, and with the camel, he would walk through the desert in the daytime, in the hot sun, with the camel carrying whatever his goods he was trying to trade from one village to another. And though it's very hot in the daytime in the desert, it becomes very cold at night. So at night he would put a peg in the ground, tie his camel to the peg, and he would set up a little tent for himself, and he got in the tent and he would keep himself warm. And he fell asleep. One night it was particularly cold, and after being asleep for an hour or so, he woke up and he found the camel had put its nose in the tent. And he thought, okay, poor creature, it's been carrying the heavy load all the day in the hot sun, let it at least have its nose in the tent. And an hour or so later, he again woke up and the whole head was in the tent. And an hour or so later, the whole neck was in the tent. By the morning, he was outside the tent and the camel had occupied the whole tent. Sadhu said, likewise, at least we should allow the camel's nose into the tent. That is, we should make some room in our life to try to put this into practice, to try to attend to ourselves. And the more we attend to ourselves, the more it will intrude into our life. Just like the camel, give it an inch and it takes a mile. So we have to give room to start this practice. Even if it's only little by little, at least let us start. The more we start, the more we go along, the more we get hooked on this practice. Because what is this practice? We are retreating from the world back into ourself. Inside ourself, it's peaceful. All the troubles are outside. We may say, oh, no, it's my own mind which is troubling me. According to Bhagavan, the mind, all the thoughts that are troubling us, they're outside. They're things other than ourselves. In our heart, there are no thoughts. There's only peace and happiness. So by turning our attention within, we are retreating into the heart. Maybe troubled by thoughts which keep on trying to drag us out. If we ignore those thoughts and continue attending to ourselves, we will find the way into our heart. There we will be peaceful, away from all the troubles of the world. Does that in any way answer your question? Maybe not adequately, but at least partially.
Yeah, that was Rosemary's question.
Yeah. Rosemary, anything more you wanted to ask in this connection?
No, that's fine. Is anyone else have a question about it? Because that was my main thrust. Is anyone interested?
You suggested a workshop, but I mean, we could certainly have a workshop, but there wouldn't be much more to say about the actual practice than this. But reading Bhagavan's teachings, thinking about Bhagavan's teachings, talking about Bhagavan's teachings, is all helpful, because the more clearly we understand his teachings, the clearer it will become to us what the practice is. But of course, merely reading the teaching, thinking about them, talking about them is not, by itself, it's useless. But all our study and all our talking about the teachings is useful only to the extent it encourages us to put it into practice. The key is practice. So practice is absolutely paramount. So you're perfectly right in saying that is the most important thing of all. But in order we can learn it only within ourselves, but we can learn it. And the guidance is within us, because what are we doing when we turn our attention within? We are turning our attention within towards the light of awareness. It illumines everything. It's the light of awareness that illumines our mind and enables it to know this whole world. So the light of awareness is the source of all knowledge. So the more we turn our attention within, the more our mind will be clarified and the clearer the way will become.
I totally agree.
Perhaps what we can do, and we can talk about at our satsang next time, once we finish reading the Ashtavakra, maybe what we want to do is establish our own practices for self-inquiry and bring our questions to satsangs, clarify with each other, and then keep calling on Michael as and when, maybe once a month or something like that, to just do that.
Sure.
We don't have to wait to finish Ashtavakra. We could start now.
Yeah.
Sadhu Om has a great take on self-inquiry, and that I think it's section 3 of his volume 1, Spiritual Practices, I think is the name of it. He talks specifically on how to do this, and exactly like Michael says, is the practice and some of the obstacles that come up during the practice and what to do about it.
Yeah, talking about obstacles that come up in the practice, that is certainly a very useful thing to talk about, because we all, ultimately, all the obstacles are our own vasanas, but they manifest in different ways. So discussing obstacles is certainly a useful thing to do.
Okay, shall we move forward, Mana, with your question?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so my question is, in the invocation to 4 courses on reality, and I think this is by S.S. Cohen, the first verse mentions the source of all thoughts to be the heart. So the source of all thoughts to be the heart. So I'm kind of like, okay, is that the heart as in the source, as in the center, or is the heart? And of course we know that Bhagavan said it's not the physiological heart, but 2 digits to the right. But is it a place in the chest, somewhere in the chest? And can you talk a little bit more about it?
Okay.
And finally, how do we get to and remain in the source of thoughts and awareness reality, which is what we're talking about today anyway.
Okay. There is a lot of confusion about this term heart that Bhagavan used, which is unnecessary confusion, because all heart means, in a spiritual context, heart means the center. And the center is not actually a place in the body. It may seem to be a place in the body, but it is not. The reason why Bhagavan sometimes said the heart is 2 digits to the right from the center of the chest, because there were some people among his devotees, there were some people who had practiced yoga a lot. And in yoga, there are the 6 chakras. And so such people asked him, is the heart you talk about, is that the same as the Anahata chakra? Anahata chakra is the heart chakra. Bhagavan said, no, it is not. Heart means heart means the reality. Heart means the awareness that is the center and circumference of everything. That which is contained in everything and in which everything is contained. But still they persisted on asking. So Bhagavan said, in relation to the body, the heart is 2 digits to the right from the center of the chest. And he gave very simple examples to illustrate this. If if you ask some school children, who will volunteer to go and run and collect something? But if a child wants to volunteer, he or she doesn't point at the legs and say, I will run. They point and say, I'll run. If you ask, who can do the sum correctly? I can do it correctly. You don't point at the head and say, I can do it correctly. But that is, we all experience ourselves centered in the body, in the chest. That is the center of our body existence. You can see this also. If you are, for example, walking down the street and a car comes behind you and suddenly honks its horn, or there's suddenly an explosion or a loud band suddenly starts, you feel a shock. If you observe where the shock is centered, it's here, 2 digits to the right from the center of the chest. You can feel it sometimes. So simple observation shows us that that is the point in the body that is somehow the center from which everything spreads. What is the significance of this? In relation to the body, ego is centered here. So that is said to be, and also what is closest to ego is all the emotions. That's why we generally associate the more superficial activity of the mind with the head, and the deeper feelings with the emotions and feelings we associate with the heart, somewhere down here in the body. But this is all only in relation to the body. But that is not actually, that is not the heart from which all thoughts arise. The first thought to arise is ego. All other thoughts arise from ego. From where does ego rise? It doesn't arise from this body, because the body comes into existence only when we rise as ego. Even in a dream, when we're dreaming, experiencing a dream body as I, we likewise experience ourselves centered 2 digits to the right from the center of the chest if we observe very closely. So which body are we, is the real heart? The dream body? Or is it in the dream body or in this body? Obviously, it's not physical. In this verse of, the verse you refer to, this 40 verses on reality is Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. S.S. Cohen published a translation of it. He knew some Tamil. He wasn't conversant with literary Tamil. Even many Tamilians find it difficult to understand poetic Tamil. So he relied mainly on translations that had gone before him. And I haven't seen I saw his translation many, many years ago, maybe about 40 years ago, 30, 40 years ago when I was in Tiruvannamalai. I remember reading it, and in many places his translation was not very accurate. So it's not the best of translations. On my blog, there is a translation of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. I could send you the link afterwards if you like. But I have translated as literally as I can. What Bhagavan says in this verse, is a very, very important verse. But it's a very, if I were to read to you the verse, you can hear what is Uḷḷadu, Uḷḷadu, Uļļadunavu, Uļļado, Uļļaparul, Uļļalara, Uļļate, Uļļadal, Uļļamenum, Uļļaparul, Uļļalevan, Uļļate, Uļļapadi, Uļļate, Uļļalona. That is, using just one word in so many different ways, Bhagavan has strung this verse together. What this means is, he first asks a rhetorical question. If what exists were not, would existing awareness exist? In other words, can awareness be other than what exists? Is it the implied meaning of that first sentence? Then what he refers to in the first sentence as Uḷļadu, means what exists.
Michael, would you mind repeating that first sentence?
Okay. If what exists were not, would existing awareness exist? That's literally what it means. What it implies is that if there were not something that actually exists, would there be awareness of existence? We are all aware I am. we are aware I am because there is something that actually exists. What actually exists is nothing but that awareness. That is, this first sentence can be interpreted, it's as I said, this is what Bhagavan wrote in Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, they're aphorisms. And often they can give room for many different shades of meaning. But essentially, what it means is that, but what exists is awareness, and awareness is what exists. And they're not two separate things. That's the implication of it. He said a similar thing in, to clarify what he meant by this first sentence, it's useful to refer to what he says in Upadēśa Undiyār. That's the 30 verses. There's a verse where he deals with this a little bit more, the same idea that he says in this first sentence, but in more depth. He says, yes, in verse 23, he says, because of the non-existence of any awareness other than what exists, to be aware of what exists is awareness. The term he's using here for what exists is Uḷḷadu. Uḷḷadu, it literally means what exists. It can also, in some contexts, mean being, but in this context, it means what exists. What actually exists is awareness. And he ends that verse by saying, awareness alone exists as we. So we are both what exists, in other words, Sat, and we are awareness, Chit. So Sat Chit is nothing but ourself. That is the implication of this. What he said of this first sentence. He's saying that he's emphasizing the oneness of existence and awareness, of what actually exists and what is aware. They are not two separate things. If what is aware were other than what exists, it wouldn't exist. And if it was some other awareness that was aware of what exists, then what exists? I mean, there cannot be anything that actually exists other than awareness. So awareness is what actually exists, is the implication of this first sentence. As I said, in this first sentence, he uses the word Uḷḷadu, which simply means what exists. In the next sentence, he uses the word Uḻḷapadu. Uḻḷapadu literally means the existing substance. It means the same as what exists. What actually exists is the substance that exists. So in the next sentence, he says, since the existing substance exists in the heart without thought, how to think of the existing substance, which is called heart? So here he clearly says what he means by the term heart is the existing substance. In other words, the reality, what actually exists. But the true substance, which is awareness, that is the heart. And since that substance exists within the heart, though it's called the heart, it exists within the heart, that means it exists within ourselves, and it exists so deep within ourselves that it's without thought. Thought is on the surface of the mind. If we go deep within ourselves, we go beyond thought. Like the waves are on the surface of the ocean. If you go deep enough into the ocean, there are no waves there. So likewise, if we go deep enough into our heart, we go beyond thought. So in the depth of our heart, where the reality exists as pure awareness, there are no thoughts. So that's what he means by, since the existing substance exists in the heart without thought, how to think of the existing substance? Because it is beyond thought, it's beyond the range of thought. We cannot think of that, of it. So how to think of the existing substance, which is called heart? He answers that question in the next sentence. Ullate, ullapadi, ullade, ullal. Being in the heart as it is, alone is thinking. Thinking here means thinking of it. So how to meditate on Brahman, how to meditate on the reality? The only way to meditate on reality is to be as it is. And how is it? It just exists as Sat-Chit, as pure awareness, as being awareness. And where does it exist? It exists in the heart, within ourselves. So turning within and just being as we are, that alone is meditating on the reality. That is the significance of here. So here, Bhagavan makes very, very clear that what he means by heart is only the reality, only the pure awareness that we actually are. What actually exists, that is the heart. That is why he often used to say, the heart is the center of everything, and that in which it is both the center and the circumference, because it is that which is in everything and which everything is. That is, it is in everything because it is the substance which appears as all these forms, and all these forms don't exist outside it, they exist within it. So that is the heart. That word, heart is nothing but our own real nature. Heart is what we actually are. So when Bhagavan talks about heart being on the right side of the chest, that was only to people who were not willing to have a deep and subtle understanding of what he was talking about. He wasn't talking, when he talked about the heart, he wasn't talking about the heart, he wasn't talking about any place in the body. In relation to the body, what is the center of our, now we're aware of ourselves, we are aware of ourselves as if we were pervading this whole body. If I touch your hand, you say I've touched you. If I touch your foot, you say I've touched you. Any part of your body that I touch, I've touched you, because you feel that you are pervading throughout the body. But though you are pervading throughout the body, but you're pervading throughout the body, but you seem to be confined within the limits of the body. The hand is you, but the table on which your hand is resting is not you. Anything outside this body is not you. The whole body seems to be you. That is how we experience the body. But though we experience the whole body as ourself, we experience ourselves centered, the center of ourselves, so to speak, we experience as 2 digits to the right from the center of the chest. That is why we habitually point to ourselves. When we refer to ourselves, we point to the chest, to that point on the chest. And why, whenever, as I say, if you ever feel a shock or something, something happens like an explosion or a loud honking of a horn or a sudden noise or something, or suddenly you get a fright, you can, if you can observe that you can feel a sensation in that center of the, you can feel as if it's centered from that point in the chest. But that's only in relation to the body. But in self-investigation, we are trying to find out what we actually are. First, we need, in this path of self-investigation, in order to investigate ourselves, we first need to understand what we are not. We are not this body. We are not the prana, the life in the body. We are not the mind. We're not the intellect. We're not the will. We are that which has mistaken itself to be all these things, that which is aware of all these things. All these things are objects. Our thoughts are objects. Our desires are objects. Everything is objects. We are the subject which is aware of all these things. So the heart is within ourselves, within the subject, not in any of these phenomena. Does that, and then you say, how do we get to and remain in the source of thoughts and awareness? Well, all thoughts, as Bhagavan says, they all originate from ego. In Who Am I, Bhagavan says in the 5th paragraph of Nāṉ Ār, Bhagavan explains it very nicely. Of all the thoughts that appear in the mind, the thought called I alone is the first thought. The term he uses for first thought is mudal minebu. Mudal means first, primal, basic, original, or causal. So that is the original thought, the causal thought, the thought that causes all other thoughts. That thought, what he refers to here as the thought called I, is ego. And the reason he calls it as a thought, according to what Bhagavan means by the term thought, is generally when people use the term thought, they often just think of the mental chatter going on in their head as thoughts. According to Bhagavan, all phenomena are only thoughts, because what he means by thought is mental phenomena. That any mental phenomenon is a thought. According to Bhagavan, all what appear to be physical phenomena are actually just thoughts, are just mental phenomena, because what we think we are seeing a world out there. We think we are seeing a light and a wall and curtains and a table and a chair and so many objects. They seem to be out there. But actually, what we are seeing, as Bhagavan says in verse 6 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, the world consists of nothing but the 5 types of sense perception, the five types of sense data, that is sights, sounds, tactile sensations, tastes, and smells. Apart from these, what we are aware of as world is only a mixture of these 5 types of sensory sense data, let's say, sensory data, perceptual data. All these are just appear where? They appear in our own mind. Just like while we are dreaming, the dream world seems to be existing outside us. There seem to be tables and chairs and mountains and houses and cars and buses and all sorts of things. When we wake up, we know all those things were just our own figment of our own imagination. They were just mental phenomena. They were all in our own mind. So according to Bhagavan, that's why he said in the previous paragraph, in the 4th paragraph of Nāṉ Ār, he says, excluding thoughts, there's no other thing called there's no other thing called world. So the world is nothing. Well, all the phenomena that make up the world are nothing but mental phenomena. They're nothing but thoughts. So when Bhagavan says of all the thoughts that appear in the mind, the thought called I is the first thought. He means that is what he means by all the thoughts. He means all phenomena. Everything that other than ourselves is a thought. Even the ego, because it is something other than pure, though it in substance it is nothing but pure awareness, but because it has grasped the form and it mistakes itself to be a form, as such it is a thought. Because it is a mixture of the awareness and what is not aware. What is not aware is thought. But though ego is a thought, though everyone calls it a thought, it is a thought unlike all other thoughts, because no other thought is aware of itself or aware of anything, whereas ego is aware of itself and aware of all other thoughts. That's why he says, of all the thoughts that appear in the mind, the thought called I alone is the first. Then he says, only after this rises do other thoughts rise. Then in the next 2 sentences, he says the same thing, but using different terms. Instead of referring to the ego as the thought called I, he refers to it as the first person. And he refers to other thoughts as second and third persons. So he said, only after the first person appears do second and third persons appear. Without the first person, second and third persons do not exist. So all thoughts arise only from ego, which is the first thought. Where does ego arise from? As I said, it rises only from ourself. That is, when we're asleep, there is nothing other than ourself. There's nothing other than the pure awareness that we actually are. From that, ego arises. And from ego, everything else arises. So, how do we get to and remain in the source of thoughts and awareness reality? Bhagavan gave a simple answer to that. Go back the way you came. That is, though that may seem a very cryptic saying, it has a very deep meaning. That is, we have risen as ego. How we have risen as ego, it is through ego, so to say, but we have come out and have entered into this world. It is through ego that we have to go back. So by turning our attention back to this ego to see, who am I, what am I, we go back into the heart. That is the way back into the heart. It is by, because Bhagavan sometimes gave the analogy of a dog seeking its human companion. The human companion may be far away, but if the dog finds the scent of the human companion, it will unfailingly follow that scent and find its friend. Likewise, the scent by which we return to by which we can trace ourselves back to the heart, that scent is ego. Because, why? Because though ego is a thought, though it is mixed, though it never stands without grasping a form as itself, it has that element of awareness in it. That awareness is the key. I don't know if you're familiar with it. There's a very nice little book called Maharshi's Gospel. It is a collection of recordings of conversations with Bhagavan. Like all such books, it's not 100% accurate, but it's a representative of the type of conversations people used to have with Bhagavan. And in one place there, Bhagavan says, in your investigation into the source of the aham-vritti is a term meaning I thought, it's another term for ego, you take the essential chit aspect of ego. That is, ego is chit jadagranti. When we are investigating what we actually are, we are ignoring the jada portion, the body. We are taking only the chit portion. Because the chit portion is the scent that the dog is following. So we are the dog following the scent of this chit portion of ego. If we follow that chit portion, we will go back the way we came. We will return to the heart from which we have risen. So that is the clue back into the heart. So long as we're attending to anything other than ourselves, that is taking us away from the heart. When we turn our attention back towards ourselves, back towards the awareness that we actually are, that will lead us back into the heart. So how we get back into the heart? By self-investigation. How do we investigate ourselves? By looking at ourselves, by attending to ourselves. Does that adequately answer your question?
Yeah.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay, the next one up is Jody. Would you like to ask your question, please?
Well, I think at this point, I think Michael answered them, but I was asking about Ramana Maharshi's view about reincarnation. When I posed this question, I felt I had come to the conclusion that reincarnation is just more Maya. And I think you already answered that, Michael, and I understand.
It is more Maya. In the question that was sent to me, you also asked about Vedic astrology. In Indian culture, is steeped in astrology. Any marriage that is arranged in India, whatever the caste someone may belong to, they refer to the astrology. It's based on the marriages are usually arranged, and they go mainly by what they call the Tithi. That's the star. Which star is in conjunction with the moon. And some are compatible. Some stars are among the 27 stars. Some are compatible with others. So marriages are arranged like that. Most people in India believe in astrology. So Bhagavan didn't have anything special to say about it. It's just part of the culture in which he lived. Any astrology, to the extent that it's true, it's a means of reading a person's personality and to some extent also possibly their destiny. That's all. But how accurate it is depends upon the skill of the astrologer and the data that they're interpreting. So that need not concern us when we're on the spiritual path. As far as reincarnation is concerned, according to Bhagavan, our present life is just a dream. So long as the dreamer exists, dreaming will continue. So when one dream comes to an end, another dream, the dreamer may rest for a while in sleep and then resumes another dream. So what is called reincarnation, some people have an idea about the general belief about reincarnation, but when we leave this body, we go off to some other world and when we come back in some other body, or we may spend some time in some other world in heaven or in hell or wherever, according to our past karmas, and then eventually back to this world and we enter another body. That's generally how people understand it, but that's not in the light of Bhagavan's teachings, we can understand what we call this world is nothing but it's a world that has appeared in our present. Our present life is just a dream, and this world is just like any other world in a dream. So when one dream comes to an end, so long as the dreamer, who is ego, survives, ego will continue dreaming, one dream after another. So that's all a reincarnation is. When in each life, we have to experience a certain prarabdha, that means a certain destiny. That is the fruit of our past actions, which have been selected by God for us to experience in this life. For He selected them in such a way that will be most conducive to our spiritual progress. So the prarabdha is that we experience in each lifetime is tailor-made to suit our level of spiritual development, the degree of purity of our mind, the type of vasanas in our mind, the vasanas that we need to get rid of. The prarabdha is tailor-made to suit our vasanas, to help us progress in the spiritual path. And if we don't, if ego survives, if we don't get rid of ego in this life, when we have another life, that's when we dream in the next dream, we take with us everything, what we take with us, well, obviously we are ego, we take with us our vasanas. So if we are inclined to spiritual practice, for example, suppose we are practicing self-investigation in this lifetime, but we don't go deep enough in our self-investigation to annihilate ego, when this body dies, we will be born again. We'll have a prarabdha suited to our spiritual practice, to our furthering our spiritual practice, and we will be drawn to the same practice again. If we're a devotee if we're attracted to Bhagavan's teachings in this lifetime, we'll be attracted to the same teachings in the next lifetime, and we'll try and follow continue following the same path. So in Bhagavad Gita, it says death is just discarding a shirt. Where you discard one shirt, and when your one shirt gets worn out, you discard it and you put on a new shirt. So does that quickly answer your question? But as you say, it is all Maya. It's not real. None of this. No dream is real. But so long as the dreamer seems to be real, the dreaming also goes on. And whatever is our current dream always seems to be real. Well, so long as we are at night time, if we have a dream, so long as we're dreaming that dream, the dream seems to be real. Only when we leave that dream and come to this dream do we recognize that that dream was just a dream. It wasn't real. Our present dream seems to be real because it's our present dream. Because why the current dream always seems to be real? Because what is actually real is only ourself. Because we experience a body as ourself, the body seems to us to be real. And the body is a part of the world, so the whole world seems to be real. So our current body and current world always seem to us to be real. Whereas the body and world of previous dreams, we recognize, oh, that was just a dream.
So Michael, are you saying that when the body falls away, excuse me, the ego can live on?
Ego, yes. Ego is not dependent on the body. The ego, because the body is just a projection of ego. So long as ego remains, it will continue projecting bodies, continue dreaming, in other words. Now we dream we're one person. In the next lifetime, we'll dream we're some other person, but it's still a dream. But what is continuous is ego, the subject, the I who is aware of all this, who is dreaming all this, that is, and who is projecting all this, that is the continuing. And along with ego, when we leave one body, we take our vasanas with us and resume the same sort of activity in the next lifetime.
So would it follow that if you get beyond suffering, it doesn't matter whether you dream another dream or not, right?
Yes, how to go beyond suffering? What is suffering? Our real nature is infinite happiness. So anything less than infinite happiness is not satisfying for us. We are always dissatisfied. So the word that is used for suffering most frequently in Indian philosophy, whether Buddhist philosophy or Hindu philosophy, is dukkha. Dukkha is often translated as suffering or pain or misery, but I think the most adequate translation of it is dissatisfaction. We, as ego, we are never satisfied. We can never be satisfied. We may be partially satisfied. If we have a desire for something and we get that thing, temporarily we are satisfied. So temporarily we're happy because we've got what we want. Very quickly the dissatisfaction comes back again, because dissatisfaction is the very nature of ego, because our real nature is nothing but infinite happiness. So nothing short of infinite happiness can satisfy us. So all our actions are driven by dissatisfaction. Whatever desire is fulfilled, we are partially satisfied, briefly satisfied, but never fully satisfied. So we go on wanting something more, something more, something more. So if you recognize that dissatisfaction is suffering, suffering remains so long as there is ego. In order to get rid of suffering, we have to get rid of the sufferer, namely ego, the one who is suffering.
And we could further debate the notion of swapping stories, comparing notes on the process of self-inquiry. And Rosemary, thank you for even introducing that subject. And Michael,
I mean, I say that is the core of the whole. I mean, that's the purpose of Bhagavan's teachings. I mean, Bhagavan didn't just give us the teaching for a nice philosophy or anything. He gave us these teachings to show us the way out of the problems that we are facing. To solve all our problems is to get rid of ego, and the way to get rid of ego is the practice of self-investigation and self-surrender. So, but if our discussions go far away from this practice, we're missing the point. We need to be focused on this practice. Maybe not always directly explaining how to practice self-investigation, because that becomes clear the more we try it. But all that we've been discussing today, it's like the moth going round the candle flame. The candle flame is that practice. We are going round and round it and getting closer and closer. One day we're going to lose ourselves in it. So whatever we talk about, we should always be bringing it back to the practice, because that is, without the practice, all these teachers. Okay, we do feel. I mean, I think for most of us, once Bhagavan has entered our life and we know about his teachings, generally we live our life more happily. But that is, we are living our life more happily to the extent that just understanding Bhagavan's teachings helps us to put it into practice. For example, the more we clearly understand Bhagavan's teachings, the more naturally we will be surrendered. We will feel inclined to surrender ourselves, not to rise as ego, to keep ourselves subdued. In fact, Marty, you had another very good question, but I suggest we keep your last question for next time, because that's also a very important subject you talk about the last two paragraphs of Who Am I? That would be a very good place to start next time.
Okay.
But the more we truly understand Bhagavan's teachings, the more we automatically begin living them. We can't understand Bhagavan's teachings correctly without automatically beginning to live them. Of course, we need to live them more and more and more. We need to go deeper and deeper. We shouldn't be satisfied just floating on the surface. But just understanding his teachings sets us on the path. And the more clearly we understand his teaching, the deeper we are able to go into the practice. So this sort of discussion is always useful. So any questions you have about practical difficulties or how to live the teachings in our life, these are the most useful questions to ask. We have to go on and on until this ego is completely crushed.
Yeah, we're going to be here a long time.
Yeah. Well, as I say, it's very much like going round and round the flame, like a moth going round and round the flame of the candle. The more we go round, the more attracted we are to that flame. And one day we'll get too close and we'll be burnt.